My name is Audrey, 33 years old, and my family just asked me to finance a lie. We were standing in the center of a $70,000 welcome home gala on Long Island, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and people drinking champagne. My mother did not even wait for the appetizers to be served before she slid a manila folder across the linen tablecloth. "Open it and sign the transfer, Audrey," she demanded, tapping her diamond ring against the paper. "Your brother needs the $500,000 from your trust fund to open his new surgical clinic." I looked across the table at Nolan, the golden boy, the hero who had just returned from a supposed medical tour in the Middle East. He was holding a glass of scotch, smiling that perfect, arrogant smile. I picked up the pen. I had spent my entire life trying to buy my parents' approval, and this seemed like the final price. But right as the ink touched the paper, my husband Jordan, a forensic scene investigator for the state police, leaned in. His voice was barely a whisper, but it froze the blood in my veins. "Do not sign that, Audrey. Something does not add up. A surgeon does not hold a heavy glass like that. And those scars on his wrist are not from shrapnel." I stopped. The pen hovered over the signature line. "If you have ever been the scapegoat of your family, expected to drain your own life to fund the golden child's illusion, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe because you will want to hear how a corporate fraud auditor and a forensic investigator dismantled a family of enablers and exposed a dangerous criminal hiding in plain sight." The silence at our table grew deafening. My mother narrowed her eyes. "What is the holdup, Audrey?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the soft jazz playing in the background. "Are you really going to be selfish tonight of all nights? Your brother spent the last 2 years saving lives in war zones. The least you can do is help him establish his practice here in New York." I looked down at the documents. They were standard wire transfer authorization forms demanding a direct routing of my grandfather's trust fund to a newly formed corporation. I am a corporate fraud auditor. I read financial documents for a living. I noticed the business was registered in Delaware just 4 days ago. The registered agent was a shell corporation, not a medical board. "I am not being selfish, Mother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I just want to read the business plan first. $500,000 is a massive capital transfer. Where are the operating cost projections? Where is the malpractice insurance ledger?" My father, a retired bank manager who should have known better, slammed his hand on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "It is not an investment, Audrey. It is family duty. Nolan sacrificed everything. You sit behind a desk looking at spreadsheets while he was pulling shrapnel out of innocent people overseas. You owe him this. We all do." Nolan set his glass down. He gave me a look of deep, patronizing pity. "It is okay, Dad. Let her read it. I know Audrey has always felt a little overshadowed by my medical career. If holding on to her money makes her feel powerful, let her have her moment. I can always take out a high-interest loan. It will just delay saving lives." His condescension made my stomach turn. He was playing them perfectly, but Jordan's words echoed in my mind. A trauma surgeon does not hold a heavy glass with a braced index finger. I looked at Nolan's hands again. Jordan was right. They were rough, heavily calloused along the palms with deep ingrained scarring around the knuckles. They did not look like the meticulously scrubbed hands of a man who spent his life performing delicate orthopedic procedures. Jordan shifted in his seat, his trained eyes scanning Nolan from head to toe. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Your clinic, Nolan," Jordan said casually, taking a sip of his water. "Which hospital are you securing your surgical privileges at? The board review process in New York takes at least 6 months." Nolan's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of pure rage that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I am bypassing the local boards for now. Going private sector. Concierge medicine for high-net-worth clients. They pay in cash, no insurance, red tape. A cash-only surgical clinic." My internal auditor alarms were screaming. I looked back at the papers. The address listed was a virtual post office box in a strip mall. My parents were ready to drain my entire safety net, the only money my grandfather left specifically for my future, for a brother who suddenly felt like a complete stranger. I put the pen down on the linen tablecloth and pushed the manila folder back toward my mother. I need to run these through my corporate legal team first, I said, making eye contact with Nolan. I will let you know on Monday. My mother's face turned bright red. Her voice dropped to a vicious hiss. You will sign this right now, Audrey, or you can walk out of this gala and forget you are part of this family. You will not disrespect your brother in public. I looked at Jordan. He gave me a single confirming nod. I grabbed my purse and stood up from the table. Then I guess we are leaving, I said, pushing my chair back. Keep your paperwork, Mother. I am not funding a ghost. I barely took 2 steps away from the table when my sister Naomi and her husband Isaiah walked over holding plates of appetizers. Isaiah is a master horologist. He is a certified watchmaker who has spent the last 15 years restoring luxury timepieces for high-end clients across the country. He has the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from knowing exactly how things work on the inside, and he never speaks unless he is absolutely certain of his facts. He placed his plate down on the table and smiled at Nolan, extending his hand in a gesture of goodwill. "Welcome back to the States, man," Isaiah said warmly. Nolan shook his hand briefly, pulling away a little too fast as if touching Isaiah was beneath him. That was when Isaiah's eyes locked onto Nolan's left wrist. Nolan was wearing a heavy silver timepiece that looked exactly like a vintage Rolex Submariner. My parents had been bragging to all their country club friends all night that Nolan bought it in Dubai after headlining an exclusive medical conference. Isaiah leaned in slightly, his professional curiosity taking over. "Nice Submariner," he said, his tone genuinely appreciative at first. But then his brow furrowed. He tilted his head, watching the dial under the bright crystal chandeliers of the ballroom. "Where did you say you got that exactly?" Nolan puffed out his chest and adjusted his tailored suit jacket, adopting a tone of extreme arrogance. "Dubai. It is from an authorized vintage dealer. It is a rare piece. Honestly, it is not something you would ever see in a local repair shop." Isaiah chuckled, a low and easy sound that instantly irritated my brother. "Well, you might want to call that dealer and ask for a full refund. The movement is all wrong." The entire table froze for the second time that evening. My mother gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace as if she had been physically struck. "What on earth are you talking about, Isaiah?" she demanded, her voice dripping with instant hostility. Isaiah pointed at the watch without actually touching it. A real Rolex Submariner from that specific era uses a caliber movement that beats at 28,800 vibrations per hour. That means the second hand sweeps smoothly around the dial, making exactly 8 tiny ticks per second. Your watch is ticking at 21,600. It is a stuttering sweep. It is a cheap Miyota movement hidden inside a fake metal case. You bought a knockoff. Nolan's face turned the color of a bruised plum. He yanked his arm back aggressively and pulled his cuff down over the watch to hide it. "You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about," he snapped, his voice rising in a dangerous mix of panic and anger. "Just because you spend your days hunched over a magnifying glass fixing cheap mall watches does not give you the right to insult me. I save lives for a living. I deal in reality, not tinkering with tiny gears in some run-down shop. You are way out of your depth here, Isaiah. Why do you not stick to your lane and let the adults handle the real business?" The classist undertone in his voice was sickening. My father immediately jumped out of his chair to back Nolan up, completely ignoring the facts Isaiah had just presented. "Isaiah! That is completely out of line," my father shouted, drawing stares from the neighboring tables. "Nolan just returned from a brutal war zone, and you are harassing him over a luxury watch. You owe him an apology right now. You have always been jealous of the opportunities this family has, and you are projecting your insecurities onto a better man." My mother chimed in, her voice shrill and echoing across the quiet ballroom. "This is exactly why I told Naomi not to bring you tonight. You never know how to behave around people of our standing. You always try to drag successful people down to your level with your petty jealousy." I slammed my purse back down on the table, the sharp crack of leather against wood, cutting right through their toxic insults. "Nobody is apologizing to him," I fired back, stepping directly between Isaiah and my father to shield him. Isaiah runs a highly successful horology business, and he knows a fake when he sees one. And right now, he is not the only one looking at a fake. Naomi grabbed Isaiah's arm, her eyes blazing with fury as she glared at our parents. "Do not ever speak to my husband like that again," she warned them, her voice shaking with rage. The gala music seemed to fade away completely as dozens of guests began turning their chairs to watch our table. The perfect aristocratic image my parents had paid $70,000 to project was shattering in real time. Nolan was breathing heavily, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He looked like a cornered animal, desperately looking for an escape route, not a refined medical professional. "You are all insane," Nolan spat, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are just looking for any pathetic excuse to hoard your money." I looked him dead in the eye, my corporate auditor instincts fully engaged. "Oh, I am not hoarding my money, I am protecting it. And if you are such a successful international surgeon, you surely have the financial records to back up this ridiculous $500,000 demand. Let us see the business plan, Nolan." Nolan stared at me, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. He clearly had not expected me to call his bluff in front of an audience. But the golden boy could never refuse a challenge. He reached into his leather briefcase resting on the empty chair next to him and pulled out a glossy, perfectly bound portfolio. He tossed it onto the table with a smug, self-satisfied grin. "Read it and weep, Audrey. It is all there. Projected revenue, overhead staffing protocols. Everything your little bean-counting brain could possibly want to see." I picked up the portfolio. The cover was thick, embossed cardstock. It looked incredibly expensive. But in the world of corporate fraud, the most elaborate covers usually hide the emptiest contents. I opened to the first page. Jordan leaned over my shoulder, his forensic gaze scanning the documents right alongside me. It took me exactly 10 seconds to spot the first massive red flag. "This is a joke, right?" I asked, looking up at him. "You are asking for $500,000 and your operational budget is a single pie chart with no itemized costs. Where are the line items for the MRI machines? What about the surgical sterilization equipment? You have listed $200,000 under a category simply called miscellaneous medical supplies. You do not just buy bulk surgical scalpels from a warehouse club, Nolan." Nolan's smug smile faltered slightly, his jaw clenching. "You do not understand the concierge medical model, Audrey. The overhead is fluid because the treatment locations are flexible. I will be operating out of private high-end facilities." I flipped to the legal section of the portfolio. The lies were so blatant it was almost insulting to my intelligence. "Fluid overhead," I repeated, tracing my finger over the state registration document. "Then explain this. You claim you established this medical group 3 years ago while working overseas. But this Delaware limited liability company was registered exactly 4 days ago. And the registered agent listed here is a mail forwarding service in Wilmington known for setting up shell companies. I know this because my auditing firm just indicted 3 cryptocurrency scammers who used this exact same address." The murmurs in the ballroom grew significantly louder. Guests at nearby tables were blatantly eavesdropping, now their champagne glasses frozen in midair. My mother looked frantically between me and Nolan, her perfect socialite facade crumbling into sheer panic. "And the financial projections," I continued, my voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. "These are not even your numbers, Nolan. You forgot to remove the watermark from the business plan template you downloaded from the internet. It literally says, 'Sample Clinic' at the bottom of page 12. Furthermore, the employer identification number you listed is 9 digits of sequential zeros. That is not a federal tax ID. That is a placeholder you were too lazy to fill in." Nolan lunged forward, snatching the portfolio right out of my hands. He was breathing heavily, his face contorted in a terrifying mix of humiliation and raw fury. "You are twisting everything," he hissed. "You always do this. You are so desperate to be the smartest person in the room that you cannot stand the thought of anyone else succeeding. I am a doctor. I save lives. You just destroy things." Before I could respond to his ridiculous outburst, my father stepped right into my personal space. His face was purple with rage. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. "That is enough, Audrey. My father roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the ballroom. I will not stand here and watch you assassinate your brother's character. You have been jealous of him since you were children. You could never stand that he had a true calling while you just chased corporate money. I stared at my father, feeling a cold, heavy knot form in my stomach. Chased money, I asked softly. I am trying to stop him from stealing yours. I am an auditor, Dad. It is my literal job to spot criminals. He is not a criminal. My father screamed, completely losing control of his temper. He is your brother, and he is twice the person you will ever be. You think your little trust fund gives you power over this family. Let me make something absolutely clear to you right now. If you do not sign that transfer by tomorrow morning, you are no longer a part of this family. I will strip you of your board seat at the family real estate company. I will write you out of the will. You will have absolutely nothing. I looked at the man who raised me. He was willing to throw away his own daughter, his own flesh and blood, to protect a man who was actively scamming him with a downloaded internet template. He was choosing the lie because the lie made him look good to his wealthy country club friends. I felt Jordan put a steadying hand on the small of my back. Isaiah and Naomi stood completely still, watching the destruction of our family unfold in real time. I looked back at my father, refusing to let him see even a single tear fall. You cannot threaten me with the loss of a family that never truly valued me in the first place, I said, my voice eerily calm. Keep your board seat, keep your will, but do not come crying to me when your golden boy drains every last cent you have. I turned my back on them, grabbed Jordan's hand, and walked out of the ballroom. I did not look back, not even when I heard my mother burst into dramatic attention-seeking tears. The battle lines were officially drawn. Jordan and I walked out of the ballroom and into the quiet elegance of the country club foyer. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was completely clear. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind us, cutting off the sounds of my mother's manufactured sobbing and the frantic murmurs of the wealthy guests. Jordan squeezed my hand, a silent anchor of support. I told him I needed 2 minutes in the restroom to splash some cold water on my face and steady my breathing before we went out to the valet. He nodded, telling me he would pull the car around to the front portico. I walked down the long, dimly lit corridor toward the restrooms. The plush carpeting absorbed the sound of my heels. It was eerily quiet out here, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the ladies' room, walked over to the marble sink, and gripped the edges. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I had just blown up my entire family dynamic, but for the first time in 33 years, I felt like I was finally breathing actual oxygen. I dried my hands, took a deep breath, and pushed the restroom door open to leave. Nolan was standing right there. He had been waiting in the alcove hidden from the main hallway. The charming, sophisticated aura of the international trauma surgeon was completely gone. His face was hard, his eyes dark and flat like a shark's. Before I could even register his presence, he stepped forward, grabbed my upper arm with a bruising grip, and shoved me backward. My shoulders hit the silk wallpapered wall hard. He stepped into my personal space, using his larger frame to completely block my path back to the lobby. The smell of expensive cologne and stale scotch radiated off him. "You think you are so clever, Audrey," he said, his voice dropping into a menacing guttural whisper that I had never heard from him before. "You think you can just embarrass me in front of those people and walk away?" "Let go of me right now," I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady despite the sudden spike of adrenaline. I tried to pull my arm free, but his grip tightened painfully, his calloused fingers digging into my skin. "You are going to sign that trust transfer first thing tomorrow morning," he snarled, leaning his face so close to mine I could feel his breath. "And if you even think about mentioning Delaware shell companies or downloaded templates again, I will personally destroy everything you have built." I glared at him, refusing to let him see fear. "You have nothing on me, Nolan. I do not live in your fantasy world." A cruel, calculating smile spread across his face. "Oh, really?" he whispered. "What about the Peterson account last November?" My blood ran completely cold. The Peterson account was an internal auditing file at my firm. I had missed a small decimal anomaly during a preliminary review. I caught it and corrected it 48 hours later completely by the book, but a formal reprimand had been placed in my private human resources file. It was a minor procedural infraction, but if it was leaked to the industry press out of context, it could ruin my reputation and cost me my license. That file was highly classified. Nobody outside my firm knew about it. You made an accounting error that cost a client temporary access to millions. Nolan continued, enjoying the look of shock on my face. How do you think the Corporate Fraud Oversight Committee would react if an anonymous tip exposed that their star auditor is hiding financial blunders? I wonder how fast your firm would fire you to save their own skin. My mind was racing. This was not just a greedy brother trying to bully his sister out of inheritance money. This was calculated. He had not just returned from overseas and asked for cash. He had been planning this. He had investigated me. He had hacked into secure systems or hired someone to dig up dirt on my career, to use as a literal blackmail weapon. This was textbook extortion. You dug into my life, I said, my voice barely a whisper as the horrifying reality set in. I do my homework, little sister, he replied smoothly. Sign the transfer by 9 in the morning or I leak the Peterson file. Your choice. You can either lose $500,000 that you did not even earn, or you can lose your entire career. Before I could formulate a response, the heavy sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Audrey Jordan called out from the end of the hall. Is everything all right? In a fraction of a second, Nolan released my arm and took a large step back. His posture relaxed, his face softening instantly into the picture of brotherly concern. He smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket and turned toward Jordan with a polite, easygoing smile. We are perfectly fine, Jordan, Nolan called back, his voice bright and completely normal. Just having a little sibling heart-to-heart before you guys head out. Drive safe, all right? Nolan gave me one last chilling look, tapping his watch twice with his index finger, as a reminder of the ticking clock on his threat. Then he turned and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving me trembling against the wall. He thought he had trapped me. He thought he had backed an auditor into a corner, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his criminal life. He had given me a timeline and he had proven that he left a digital paper trail. I did not just want to protect my money anymore. I wanted to destroy him. The drive back to our house was entirely silent. I stared out the passenger window, watching the streetlights blur past, turning over Nolan's threat in my mind. When Jordan pulled into our driveway and cut the engine, I finally spoke. He knows about the Peterson account, I said, my voice shaking slightly in the quiet car. Jordan unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to look at me in the dark. The internal audit from last November, he asked. I nodded. He threatened to leak it to the Oversight Committee if I do not sign the trust transfer by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. He is not just greedy, Jordan. He is organized. He has been digging into my secure files. Jordan's expression hardened into the cold, calculated look he wore at crime scenes. Let us go inside, he said. I have some digging of my own to show you. We walked into our house and Jordan went straight to his home office. As a forensic scene investigator, he had a massive dual monitor setup that he used for analyzing digital evidence. He booted up his computer and connected his phone. During the gala, while my parents were busy parading Nolan around, Jordan had been subtly taking high-resolution photographs of him using the telephoto lens on his smartphone. He pulled up an image on the massive left monitor. It was a close-up profile shot of Nolan laughing with my father. Look at the left side of his neck, Jordan instructed, pointing a pen at the screen, right above the collar line. I leaned in closer. There was a patch of raised, discolored skin. At dinner, Nolan told my parents those were shrapnel scars from a mortar shell explosion near his field hospital in Syria. That is not shrapnel damage, Jordan said flatly. Shrapnel leaves irregular, jagged tearing and deep punctured divots. It damages the underlying muscle tissue. Look at the pattern of the scarring here. It is faint, but you can see the geometric outline. It is rectangular with faded blue-green pigmentation lingering at the edges. What does that mean? I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. It means he had a massive dense tattoo removed, Jordan explained. And whoever did it used a high-intensity Q-switched laser, but they rushed the sessions. They did not wait the standard 8 weeks between treatments, which caused the dermal layer to blister and scar. People usually only rush laser removal like that when they are trying to hide a gang affiliation or a prison identifier quickly. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. My parents were sleeping under the same roof as a man who was desperately erasing a criminal past. "Now look at this," Jordan said, pulling up a second photo on the right monitor. It was a shot of Nolan's hands resting on the dining table, fingers steepled together. Jordan zoomed in on Nolan's right index finger and the web of his thumb. "Notice the thick yellowish calluses here and here," Jordan said. He claims to be an orthopedic surgeon. Surgeons are obsessed with their hands. They have to maintain extreme tactile sensitivity to feel bone fragments and vascular tension. They moisturize constantly and wear protective gloves even for basic household chores. They absolutely do not have thick, abrasive calluses. "So where do those calluses come from?" I asked. Jordan tapped the screen right over Nolan's index finger. "That is a textbook trigger callus. It comes from the repetitive friction of pulling a heavy, non-modified trigger mechanism on a rifle. And the rough patches on his palms are from gripping knurled steel. He does not handle delicate scalpels, Audrey. He handles heavy artillery. Your brother is not a doctor. He is a mercenary or worse." The reality of the situation crashed over me like a tidal wave. The man who had pushed me against the wall in the country club hallway was not just an arrogant sibling. He was a trained, physically dangerous criminal who was currently attempting to extort me for $500,000. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time. It was almost midnight. The thought of my parents sleeping down the hall from him made my stomach twist into painful knots. Despite everything they had done to me tonight, despite the fact that my father had practically disowned me to protect this imposter, I could not just let them be victims of a violent con artist. "We have to call the police," I said, my voice urgent. "We have to send a patrol car to the estate right now." Jordan shook his head, keeping his eyes locked on the monitor. "Think about it, Audrey. If we call local patrol based on a hunch about calluses and scars, what happens? Nolan plays the victim. He tells the officers that his jealous, estranged sister is harassing him. Your parents will back him up completely. They will probably demand a restraining order against you. And worse, it will tip Nolan off that we are onto him. If he gets spooked, he might just empty their safe and disappear into the night, or he might do something violent." He was right. My corporate auditor training kicked back in suppressing the panic. In an audit, you never confront the suspect until you have undeniable, irrefutable documentary evidence. You build a cage of paper and data that they cannot escape from. "If he is not a doctor," I said, stepping closer to the desk, "then how did he fake all those stories about the hospital in Syria?" My parents said he knew all the medical terminology. He talked about specific surgical procedures at dinner. "Anyone can memorize medical jargon from a textbook or watch a few documentaries," Jordan replied, minimizing the photographs and opening a secure browser window linked to the state police background check database. "But you cannot fake federal and state registries. If he is going to blackmail you over an accounting file, then we are going to dissect his entire digital existence." Jordan cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He typed in his credentials to access the secure network. I stood right behind him, watching the cursor blink rhythmically on the dark screen. We had exactly 9 hours until Nolan's deadline. 9 hours to find the fatal flaw in his perfect story. We were going to find out exactly who was wearing my brother's face, and we were going to tear his fake life down to the studs. I did not sleep a single minute that night. Jordan and I sat in the blue glow of his monitors until the sun came up, pulling every thread we could find on the man sleeping in my parents' guest room. By 7 in the morning, I had seen enough to make my first strike. I logged into my corporate banking portal and initiated an immediate federal freeze on the grandfather's trust. I used a specific legal clause designed for suspected elder financial coercion. It was a nuclear option, locking every dime until a formal investigation could be concluded. At exactly 9:15, my phone vibrated on the desk. The caller ID showed my mother's number. I pressed accept and put it on speakerphone so Jordan could hear. My mother did not even say hello. She was screaming so loudly that the audio actually distorted. "Audrey, what have you done?" she shrieked, her voice shaking with rage. "We just went to the bank with your brother to deposit the $500,000 check we wrote from the primary trust. The teller told us the check bounced. They said the entire trust is federally locked and they threatened to call security when your father demanded an override. Fix this right now. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, feeling completely detached from her hysterics. I am the primary trustee, Mother, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I placed a federal freeze on the account early this morning. I enacted the elder coercion protocol. That money is not moving an inch until a federal judge reviews the fraudulent Delaware corporation your guest is trying to fund. My father snatched the phone from her. I could hear his heavy breathing through the speaker. You arrogant, ungrateful little brat, he roared. How dare you treat your own flesh and blood like a criminal? Your brother is a decorated trauma surgeon trying to save lives. You are nothing but a jealous bureaucrat trying to ruin his homecoming. He is not a doctor, Dad, I said, trying one last time to make him listen to reason. He is a fraud. The clinic is a shell company. If you give him that money, it is gone forever. My father let out a bitter, mocking laugh. The only fraud in this family is you, Audrey. I warned you last night. If you chose your petty jealousy over your family, there would be consequences. You are officially dead to us. He hung up. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, feeling a strange mix of profound grief and absolute clarity. My father was a man of his word when it came to his pride, and his retaliation was swift and brutal. 2 hours later, I drove to a local electronics store to buy an encrypted hard drive for Jordan's data collection. When I swiped my card at the register, the terminal beeped and flashed declined. I frowned and handed the cashier my backup card, a corporate expense account linked to the family real estate business. Declined again. I walked out to my car and opened my banking app. Every single joint account I shared with my parents, accounts that held my childhood savings and my early college funds, had been completely drained and closed. My father had transferred everything into his private accounts. Before I could even process the financial hit, an email notification popped up on my screen. It was a formal legal notice from my father's attorney. It stated that an emergency shareholder meeting had been convened for the family real estate board. By a unanimous vote led by my father and mother, I had been immediately terminated from my position on the board of directors. My access cards to the corporate offices were deactivated. My company car was reported as stolen, and I was given 24 hours to return it. They were trying to financially starve me into submission. They thought that by cutting off my access to the family wealth, I would come crawling back, unfreeze the trust, and hand over the $500,000 to their golden boy. They assumed I was just a spoiled heiress who could not survive without their credit lines. But they forgot who they were dealing with. I was a senior corporate fraud auditor. I made 6 figures on my own merits, completely independent of their real estate money. My personal accounts, the ones they did not know about, were heavily padded and secured. I sat in the driver's seat of my car and actually smiled. By kicking me off the board, my father had inadvertently severed my fiduciary duty to his company. I no longer had to protect his assets from the collateral damage of a federal investigation. He had just handed me a blank check to tear his entire financial structure apart to get to Nolan. I started the engine and drove straight back to our house. Jordan was waiting for me in the office, surrounded by stacks of freshly printed background checks. He looked up as I walked in. I tossed my deactivated family credit cards straight into the trash can. They cut me off, I told him, rolling up my sleeves. They kicked me off the board and drained the joint accounts. Jordan leaned back in his chair, a dangerous smirk crossing his face. Well, he said, pulling a new file folder from the stack. Then I guess we do not need to play nice anymore. Wait until you see what I just found on your brother's medical license. I walked around the massive mahogany desk and stood directly behind Jordan's chair. The morning sunlight was just starting to filter through the blinds, casting sharp shadows across the scattered documents in our home office. Jordan had the glossy business plan from the gala open flat on the desk, right next to his keyboard. He tapped his pen against the bottom of the executive summary page, pointing to a 10-digit alphanumeric code printed beneath Nolan's signature. Every medical professional operating in the United States has a national provider identifier, Jordan explained, his eyes locked on the dual monitors. It is a unique identification number for covered healthcare providers. Your brother proudly printed this specific license number on every single page of his business plan to make it look official to your parents. I crossed my arms, feeling the familiar adrenaline rush of a corporate audit taking over. Did you run the number through the public state board portal? I asked. Jordan shook his head and smirked. Public portals only give you active status and disciplinary history. I bypassed the public system and used my state police credentials to access the Federal Medical Registry. That database gives me everything: date of birth, graduation year, residency locations, and cross-referenced international activity. He hit the enter key. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second before a highly detailed government dossier populated on the right monitor. Jordan highlighted a specific section of the text and stepped back so I could read it clearly. Look at the graduation date, Jordan instructed. I leaned in and read the bold text on the screen. According to the Federal Registry, the doctor attached to that specific license number graduated from the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in the spring of 2005. I stared at the date, my analytical brain instantly doing the math. That is impossible, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Nolan is 36 years old. He was born in 1990. If this doctor graduated from medical school in 2005, Nolan would have been 15 years old at the time. You do not graduate from a top-tier medical program when you are barely old enough to have a learner's permit. Exactly, Jordan said, turning his chair to face me. Criminals are arrogant, Audrey. They always think they are the smartest people in the room. He needed a valid medical license number to make his fake Delaware LLC look legitimate on paper, so he just scraped a random active number from an online directory. He assumed your parents would never verify it, and he figured you would be too intimidated by his threats to look closely. The license number he provided actually belongs to a 60-year-old cardiovascular surgeon currently practicing in Chicago. My mind was racing. If the license number in the portfolio is stolen, I reasoned, then what about his actual medical credentials? Run my brother's full name. If Nolan actually became a doctor overseas, like my parents claim, he has to exist in the international registry. Jordan turned back to the keyboard. His fingers flew across the keys as he closed the false profile and opened the global search parameters. He typed in Nolan's full legal name and date of birth. We waited in agonizing silence as the database communicated with international servers. A small loading icon spun on the screen for what felt like an eternity. Finally, a file appeared, but it was not a standard medical profile. The entire border of the digital document was highlighted in bright red, and a bold watermark reading, "Flagged for federal review," covered the screen. Jordan leaned closer, his forensic instincts immediately kicking into overdrive. "This is not good," he muttered, scrolling down the page to read the classified case notes. "What is it?" I asked, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "What does the red flag mean?" "It means the credentials are compromised," Jordan explained, his voice losing all traces of its previous satisfaction. According to this international incident report, the real Dr. Nolan had his entire identity compromised overseas exactly 2 years ago. His medical license, his passport, and his federal identification were all reported stolen during a chaotic raid on a field hospital in Damascus. I felt the blood drain from my face. 2 years ago. That was exactly when communication with Nolan became spotty. My parents had told everyone that he was on a highly classified medical mission and could not use video calls for security reasons. We had only received typed emails and occasional voice messages with terrible audio quality ever since. I looked back at the photographs of the man from the gala that Jordan had analyzed the night before. The laser tattoo removal, the heavy artillery calluses, the sudden desperate need for $500,000 in untraceable cash. Jordan looked up at me, his expression deadly serious. "Audrey," he said quietly, "the man sleeping in your parents' guest room right now is not your brother pulling a financial scam. Your brother had his life stolen 2 years ago. The man upstairs is the person who stole it. The man upstairs is the person who stole it." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jordan and I stared at the computer screen, the reality of the international incident report settling over us. The man sleeping in my parents' guest room was not just a scam artist looking for a quick payday. He was a violent opportunist who had essentially stolen a dead man's life. Before either of us could process the next step, the doorbell rang. The sudden noise made me jump. Jordan instantly reached into his desk drawer and pulled out his service weapon, keeping it angled downward as he moved toward the hallway. I followed closely behind him, my heart hammering in my throat. Jordan checked the security monitor and exhaled a sharp breath of relief. "It is Isaiah," he said, holstering his weapon and opening the front door. My brother-in-law stepped inside, looking completely different from his usual calm demeanor. He was out of breath and his eyes were wide with a mix of anger and sheer panic. He did not even bother saying good morning. He walked straight past us and headed directly into Jordan's home office, locking the door the second we were all inside. "He was at my shop," Isaiah said, his chest heaving as he leaned against the mahogany desk. "Nolan showed up at my repair shop right when I opened the doors at 8 o'clock. He acted completely normal, like the massive fight at the gala last night never even happened. He handed me the fake Rolex and told me the metal bracelet was pinching his wrist. He tossed it on my counter, gave me a $50 bill, and told me to take out 2 links. He said he had errands to run and would pick it up this afternoon." I looked at Isaiah, completely confused by the timeline. "But the gala ended in a screaming match," I said, crossing my arms. "Why would he trust you with his watch after you humiliated him in front of everyone?" "That was exactly what bothered me," Isaiah replied, reaching into his heavy canvas work jacket. "Criminals with egos that massive do not just forgive and forget. Plus, it is a cheap knockoff. You do not bring a fake watch to a master horologist to adjust the band. You do it yourself with a paperclip. It did not make any logical sense." Isaiah pulled a clear plastic evidence bag from his pocket and placed it gently on the center of the desk next to Jordan's keyboard. The metal casing of the Rolex was resting inside, but the stainless steel case back had been completely unscrewed and removed. "I wanted to see exactly how cheap the internal movement was," Isaiah explained, pointing at the bag. "I figured I would take a picture of the terrible craftsmanship just to have some ammunition the next time he insulted my career. But when I popped the back off, I did not find any gears. There is no mainspring. There is no balance wheel." Jordan leaned over the desk, his forensic training taking over immediately. He picked up the plastic bag and held it up to the desk lamp to get a better look at the internal cavity of the watch. It was completely hollowed out. Where the mechanical heart of the timepiece should have been there was a crude cluster of modern microelectronics. A flat lithium polymer battery was glued to the inside of the case. Connected to it was a tiny green circuit board housing a microcellular data card and a copper antenna wire. "That is a GPS transponder," Jordan said, his voice dropping an octave as he recognized the components. "And right there next to the charging port, that is a high-frequency omnidirectional microphone. He did not bring this watch to your shop to get the band-sized, Isaiah. He planted a listening device inside your business. He knew that Naomi and you are my closest allies in this family." I realized the horrifying truth, making my blood run cold. "He figured we would talk to you about the trust fund freeze. He was trying to track your movements and listen to our conversations to find a new angle to extort me." "He has been tracking us all morning," Isaiah said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "He knows I came straight here instead of staying at the shop." Jordan shook his head and tapped the plastic bag. "No, he does not. Notice how the battery wires are severed." Isaiah cut the power source the second he realized what it was. "The device went dark 10 minutes ago. Nolan thinks it just ran out of battery or lost signal inside a thick concrete building. He does not know we have his hardware. He does not know we have his hardware. The relief was temporary, but it gave us a tactical advantage." I looked at the wall clock. It was almost 10 in the morning. Nolan had given me a deadline of 9 o'clock to sign the trust transfer, a deadline I had deliberately ignored. I needed to go to my office. If I changed my daily routine now, Nolan would suspect we were building a case against him. I told Jordan and Isaiah to stay at the house and completely map out the digital network connected to that GPS tracker. I grabbed my briefcase, put on my sharpest blazer, and drove straight into Manhattan. My corporate auditing firm occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass high-rise in the financial district. The main lobby was a massive open atrium of white marble and polished steel designed to intimidate. As I walked through the revolving doors and approached the private elevators, I immediately noticed a commotion near the security desk. My assistant, a brilliant young woman named Clara, rushed over to me with a look of sheer panic on her face. "Audrey," she whispered, urgently intercepting me before I could reach the turnstiles. "There are 2 men here demanding to see you. They have been causing a scene for the last 10 minutes. They told building security they are here to serve you with federal legal documents." I did not even have to ask who it was. I looked past her and saw Nolan standing near the reception desk. He was wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit, playing the part of the wealthy, aggrieved surgeon to perfection. Standing next to him was a slick, overdressed man clutching a thick manila envelope. I took a deep breath, letting my professional training override my anger. I walked right up to them. My colleagues were lingering near the elevator banks, blatantly watching the drama unfold. Nolan gave me a look of pure venomous triumph. "You missed the deadline, little sister," he said, his voice echoing through the marble lobby. "I tried to do this the easy way, but you left me no choice." The man next to him stepped forward aggressively, shoving the manila envelope directly into my chest. I caught it before it hit the floor. "Audrey," he said loudly, making sure every auditor in the lobby could hear him. "My name is Gregory Pierce. I represent your brother. You have just been officially served with a lawsuit for defamation of character, tortious interference with a medical business, and a formal demand letter to immediately unfreeze the family trust. If you do not comply by noon today, we will be seeking maximum punitive damages." He adjusted his silk tie and smirked. "Furthermore, we are prepared to file a formal complaint with your corporate oversight committee regarding your unstable behavior and professional misconduct." It was a classic intimidation tactic. They wanted to embarrass me in front of my peers, so I would panic and give them the money to make the scene go away. I slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the legal filing. I did not look at the ridiculous claims. I looked straight at the letterhead. "Gregory Pierce," I said, my voice cutting through the lobby like ice. "Senior partner at Pierce & Associates. I thought your name sounded familiar." I opened my briefcase and pulled out my company tablet. The firm wireless network connected instantly. Pierce puffed out his chest. "Yes," he said smugly, "and I do not lose cases. I highly suggest you listen to your brother and release those funds before I ruin your career." I ignored his threat entirely. My fingers moved rapidly across the touchscreen as I logged directly into the public database of the Securities and Exchange Commission. In my line of work, you memorize the names of the worst offenders in the financial sector. Gregory Pierce was not a high-powered litigator. He was a bottom-feeding fixer for white-collar criminals. "Mr. Pierce," I said, turning the tablet screen so he could see it, "I am a senior fraud auditor. Did you really think you could walk into my building and threaten my job without me running a background check on you?" Pierce's smug smile faltered. He looked at the tablet. "According to this active federal filing, I announced, raising my voice so my colleagues and the security guards could hear every single word. You are currently under investigation by the SEC for laundering illicit funds through shell companies in Delaware, the exact same state where my brother's fake medical clinic was registered exactly 4 days ago." The color instantly drained from Pierce's face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I took a step closer to him, lowering my voice so only he and Nolan could hear the final threat. "You are already facing federal prison time for money laundering, Gregory. Do you really want to add extortion and accessory to wire fraud to your rap sheet? Because if you do not turn around and walk out of my building right now, my next phone call is to the federal prosecutor handling your case. I will personally hand them the fraudulent business plan you helped draft." Pierce physically recoiled. He looked at me, then looked at Nolan with sheer panic in his eyes. He did not say a single word. He snatched his briefcase, turned on his heel, and sprinted toward the revolving doors, completely abandoning his client in the middle of the lobby. Nolan stood there utterly humiliated. The mask of the confident surgeon had completely shattered. The entire lobby was staring at him. He realized in that exact moment that I was not just immune to his threats. I was vastly more powerful than he was in this arena. "You have until the end of the day, Nolan," I whispered, staring him down. "Run while you still can." Because the next time I see you, I will not be serving you with paper. I will be serving you with police. I turned my back on him, swiped my badge, and walked through the security turnstiles, leaving him completely alone in the atrium. I walked out of the building, retrieved my car from the underground parking garage, and drove straight back to Long Island. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Gregory Pierce was still burning in my veins. When I walked through my front door, the atmosphere in our house was incredibly heavy. Jordan and Isaiah were sitting at the dining room table. Jordan's laptop was open and several printed documents were spread out across the wood. They both looked up at me, and I instantly knew from their expressions that the situation had escalated far beyond a simple corporate scam. "Did he show up at the office?" Jordan asked, standing up from his chair. "He did," I replied, setting my briefcase down. "He brought a lawyer to serve me with a defamation suit. But the lawyer was under active federal investigation for money laundering. I exposed him in the lobby and he ran out of the building. The fake Nolan is panicked." "What did you two find while I was gone?" Jordan rubbed the back of his neck and let out a heavy sigh. "Sit down, Audrey. You need to see this." I pulled out a chair next to Isaiah. He gave me a sympathetic look that made my stomach drop. Jordan turned his laptop screen toward me. There was a highly classified Interpol document displayed on the monitor. A red notice. The photograph attached to the file was unmistakably the man who was currently sleeping in my parents' house. But the name printed next to the photo was not Nolan, it was Elias Thorne. "I managed to piggyback off a joint task force server," Jordan explained quietly. "I ran his facial recognition profile through the global database. The man pretending to be your brother is Elias Thorne. He is a dishonorably discharged ex-military operative who joined a private mercenary group operating out of the Middle East. He is currently wanted internationally for arms smuggling and wire fraud." I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of the lie. "If he is a mercenary," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "then where is my actual brother? Where is Nolan?" Jordan looked at Isaiah, then back at me. His eyes were filled with profound sorrow. "Audrey," he said gently, "your brother is gone." The words felt like a physical blow to my chest. "Gone," I repeated, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "What do you mean, gone?" "My parents talk to him on the phone. He sends emails." Jordan slid a second piece of paper across the table. It was a redacted casualty report from an international humanitarian organization. "Look at the date," he said. I read the date. It was exactly 2 years ago. The exact time when Nolan's video calls stopped and his communication became text only. 2 years ago, a field hospital in Damascus was targeted in a bombing raid. Jordan explained, his voice steady but full of empathy. The real Nolan was in the surgical ward when it happened. He did not survive the blast. Elias Thorne was part of a private security detail operating in the same sector. During the chaos of the aftermath, Thorne looted the hospital. He stole Nolan's passport, his medical credentials, his wallet, and his personal journals. Isaiah leaned forward, folding his hands together on the table. "That is how he knows so much about your family, Audrey. He did not just steal a medical license, he spent the last 2 years reading your brother's private journals. He memorized all the stories about your childhood, your parents' country club, and the family real estate business. He knew exactly what your parents wanted to hear, and he knew exactly how to play the role of the golden boy returning from war." Tears blurred my vision, dropping onto the printed casualty report. Despite all the resentment, despite the blatant favoritism my parents had shown him, Nolan was still my brother. He had actually gone overseas to save lives. He had actually tried to do something good with his medical degree. And he had died doing it. Meanwhile, this parasite had stolen his legacy, worn his face, and manipulated his grieving parents just to secure a massive payday. "He knew your parents had money." Jordan continued, letting me process the grief. "Thorne is in deep trouble with a cartel overseas. He owes them a massive amount of cash. He realized that if he assumed Nolan's identity, he could return to the United States, play the traumatized war hero, and extract hundreds of thousands of dollars from your wealthy parents to pay off his debts." The profound sadness I felt for my brother was rapidly replaced by a blinding, white-hot rage. My parents were currently doting on the very man who had desecrated their real son's memory. They were mortgaging their entire life to fund a violent criminal. I wiped my eyes and looked at Jordan. The grief could wait. Right now, I had to stop a monster. What is our next move? Jordan closed his laptop and looked at me with absolute determination. Our next move is taking this out of the local jurisdiction, he said. Thorn is an international fugitive. If we call local patrol, it will turn into a chaotic standoff, and your parents could be caught in the crossfire. We need to take this Interpol file and the GPS tracker directly to my task force commander at the federal building right now. They have the authority and the resources to orchestrate a surgical strike. Isaiah stood up and grabbed his heavy canvas jacket. I'm going back to the shop to lock everything down, he said. Then I am picking Naomi up from her office, and we are staying at a hotel under an assumed name until this is completely over. I am not letting that monster anywhere near my wife. We agreed on the plan. Isaiah slipped out the back door to avoid being seen from the street. Jordan and I gathered all the printed evidence, loaded the deactivated GPS tracker into a secure plastic evidence bag, and drove straight into the city to the federal field office. We spent 2 hours in a secure windowless briefing room, with Jordan's task force commander laying out the entire timeline. We showed them the fake medical clinic paperwork, the extorted trust funds, and the stolen identity. The commander was furious. He immediately initiated a silent federal wiretap on my parents' home network and authorized a tactical sting operation for the following day. We left the federal building feeling like we finally had the upper hand. We had a solid plan. We had the full backing of the federal government. But Elias Thorne was not a man who waited for his enemies to make the first move. When Jordan pulled our car into our driveway an hour later, I instantly knew something was terribly wrong. The heavy oak front door of our house was standing slightly open. The deadbolt had not been forced or kicked in. The metal casing around the lock was scratched, indicating someone had used professional tension tools to manually pick it. Jordan threw his right arm across my chest, signaling me to stay completely still in the passenger seat. He drew his service weapon, stepped out of the car, and approached the door with silent, practiced steps. He cleared the first floor, then the second, before calling out that the house was empty. I walked through the front door and let out a sharp gasp. Our home had been completely turned upside down. The living room cushions were slashed open, the white stuffing scattered across the hardwood floor like fresh snow. The books from our library were violently swept off the shelves, their spines broken and pages torn. But as I walked further into the house, I realized this was not a standard robbery. The expensive flat-screen television was still securely mounted on the wall. My jewelry box in the master bedroom had been dumped onto the floor, but my diamond earrings and heavy gold necklaces were completely untouched. The thief did not want money. He wanted to send a message of terror. I rushed down the hall to my home office. The door had been kicked entirely off its hinges. My locked filing cabinets, the ones holding the physical copies of the trust fund ledgers, and my corporate auditing backups, had been violently pried open with a crowbar. Every single piece of paper had been run through my heavy-duty cross-cut shredder. The plastic waste bin was overflowing with ribbons of destroyed documents. Thorne had tried to erase my leverage. He thought by destroying my physical files he could blind my ability to track his fake clinic and force me to unfreeze the money. I backed out of the office, my heart pounding in my ears. I walked into the dining room to find Jordan standing completely still, staring intently at the center of our mahogany dining table. Driven deep into the expensive wood, standing straight up like a gruesome monument, was a single stainless steel surgical scalpel. It was a direct, unmistakable threat. Thorne was telling us that he could get to us whenever he wanted. He was reminding us of the medical role he was playing and warning us of what his hands were actually capable of doing. My initial reaction was pure paralyzing fear. I wanted to pack a bag, get back in the car, and flee the state. I looked at Jordan, fully expecting him to be enraged that a criminal had violated the sanctity of our home. But Jordan did not look scared, and he did not look angry. He looked entirely in his element. He calmly holstered his weapon. He did not yell or pace around the room. He walked over to the hall closet, pulled out his black reinforced forensic kit, and set it gently on the floor. He snapped on a pair of tight blue latex gloves and pulled out a high-powered ultraviolet flashlight and a magnetic fingerprint dusting brush. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling as I stared at the blade stuck in our table. "I am doing my job," Jordan said coolly, clicking the ultraviolet light on. "Criminals like Thorne are arrogant. They rely on brute force and fear to cover their tracks. He broke into a house to intimidate an auditor, but he forgot he was breaking into the home of a forensic investigator. He touched our door. He touched your cabinets. He touched that scalpel. He brought his mess into my laboratory, Audrey, and I am going to make him deeply regret it. Stay by the door and do not touch anything. I am going to process this entire house, and we are going to find the mistake he just made." I stood frozen in the doorway of the dining room, watching my husband transform our violated sanctuary into an active crime scene. Jordan moved with a terrifying level of calm. He did not rush or let anger cloud his judgment. He swept the beam of his ultraviolet flashlight across the floorboards, tracing the chaotic path Thorne had taken through our home. I watched him examine the deep gouges in the hardwood where the crowbar had been dragged. Then he moved down the hallway toward the back of the house, heading for the kitchen and the rear patio doors. I followed him at a safe distance, making sure not to step on any debris. When we reached the kitchen, the source of a cold draft became immediately obvious. One of the glass panes on our French doors had been completely shattered from the inside. Thorne had carefully picked the front door lock to enter quietly, but his exit had been an explosion of rage. He had smashed the glass with the crowbar on his way out. Jordan crouched down next to the broken glass littering the floor. He leaned in close, his face inches from the sharp, jagged edges still clinging to the wooden doorframe. He reached into his kit and pulled out a sterile cotton swab and a small plastic vial. "Look at this," Jordan instructed, pointing his flashlight at a large shard of glass shaped like a dagger. "Right near the point." I leaned forward and saw it. Smeared against the transparent glass was a thick, unmistakable droplet of fresh crimson blood. He was swinging the crowbar recklessly when he broke the glass, Jordan explained carefully, swabbing the blood and sealing it inside the plastic vial. A piece of shrapnel must have caught his hand or arm on the way down. This is an undeniable biological match. We now have Elias Thorne's DNA, directly linking him to the destruction of a federal auditor's property. Jordan placed the vial safely into his kit and stood up. He walked back into the living room, returning to the slashed sofa cushions and the scattered stuffing. He got down on his hands and knees, pressing his cheek almost flat against the floor to look underneath the heavy furniture. He swept his flashlight back and forth in the narrow gap between the bottom of the couch and the hardwood floor. Suddenly, the beam stopped. "Got you," Jordan whispered. He put on a fresh latex glove, reached his arm deep under the sofa, and pulled out a small rectangular object. It was a cheap prepaid black cell phone, a burner. Thorne must have had it in his pocket while he was violently tearing our living room apart. In his frantic state, it had slipped out and he had kicked it under the couch without even realizing he had dropped it. Jordan carried the burner phone to the kitchen island far away from the mess. He pulled a portable data extraction cable from his forensic kit and connected the burner directly to a secure diagnostic tablet he kept in his gear bag. Because it was a cheap prepaid model, it lacked the sophisticated encryption of a modern smartphone. Jordan bypassed the simple 4-digit lock screen in less than 2 minutes. We opened the messaging application together. There was only one contact saved in the entire phone listed, simply with the letter M. The message history was not long, but what we read made my blood run completely cold. The messages were a chronological record of pure desperation. The contact named M was demanding payment in language that was ruthless and highly professional. It was clearly an organized crime syndicate or a cartel enforcer. We read the threats. They detailed exactly what they would do to Thorne if he did not settle his overseas debt immediately. But it was the most recent exchange, sent just 1 hour before Thorne broke into our house, that escalated the situation from a financial scam to an imminent matter of life and death. Thorne had sent a message promising the cartel that he would wire $500,000 to their offshore account in exactly 48 hours. The reply from M was brief and chilling. 48 hours. After that, we do not want your money. We want your head. Then I read Thorne's final outgoing message, the one that outlined his backup plan. He wrote to the cartel that his sister had unexpectedly frozen the trust fund, causing a temporary delay. But he assured them he had a secondary source of capital ready to exploit. He texted that his wealthy parents were completely under his control. If the trust fund remained locked, he was going to manipulate them into liquidating their entire retirement portfolio first thing tomorrow morning. He planned to drain their life savings, take every single penny of their cash, and vanish overseas, leaving them completely destitute and at the mercy of his creditors. I stepped back from the kitchen island feeling physically sick. He was not just going to steal from my parents, he was going to destroy their entire future by tomorrow morning, and if he failed, a cartel would likely track him right to their doorstep. We no longer had the luxury of time. We had to spring the trap immediately. I gathered the physical evidence scattered across our kitchen island. I carefully placed the clear plastic bag containing the hollowed-out Rolex casing into my leather tote. Next, I grabbed the manila folder holding the printed Interpol red notice, the international casualty report, and the decoded text messages from the burner phone. Jordan wanted to come with me fully prepared to wear his badge and carry his service weapon, but I told him no. If a federal investigator walked into their house, my parents would instantly go on the defensive. They needed to hear this from their daughter. As a corporate auditor, my job was to present the evidence of fraud to the stakeholders. My parents were the stakeholders of their own lives, and I had to give them one final chance to divest from this criminal illusion. I drove alone to their Long Island estate, breaking the speed limit the entire way. When I pulled through the heavy wrought iron gates and parked on the sweeping circular driveway, the house looked as perfect and pristine as it always did. The manicured hedges and the grand brick facade betrayed absolutely none of the dark, violent reality festering inside. I used my spare key to unlock the heavy front door, praying silently that Thorne was not lingering in the foyer or the hallways. The house was completely quiet. I walked through the formal dining room and found my parents sitting in the bright, airy sunroom overlooking the swimming pool. They were drinking expensive espresso, looking perfectly relaxed in their wealthy domestic bubble. My mother was casually flipping through a luxury furniture catalog, while my father read the financial section of the morning newspaper. They looked up when I walked in, and their expressions instantly hardened from peaceful contentment to cold, rigid hostility. "What exactly are you doing here, Audrey?" my father demanded aggressively, folding his newspaper and tossing it onto the glass coffee table. "I thought I made it explicitly clear that you are not welcome in this house until you sign that trust fund release." I did not respond to his anger. I walked directly over to the coffee table and dropped the heavy manila folder right on top of his newspaper. I reached into my tote, pulled out the evidence bag containing the fake Rolex, and set it down next to the folder. "I am here to save your lives," I said, my voice trembling slightly, despite my best efforts to maintain professional composure. "The man currently sleeping upstairs in your guest room is not Nolan. He is a highly dangerous mercenary named Elias Thorne. Our real brother died 2 years ago in a hospital bombing in Damascus. This man stole his identity." My mother dropped her heavy catalog onto the floor. She looked at the plastic bag, then up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer venomous indignation. "What kind of sick, twisted joke is this?" she gasped, clutching the collar of her silk blouse. "It is not a joke, Mom," I pleaded, leaning forward to open the folder and display the Interpol red notice. "Look at the photograph. Look at the federal agency seal." He planted a listening device inside that watch to track Isaiah. "He broke into my house 2 hours ago and destroyed my auditing files because he is trying to cover his tracks. He owes a violent cartel $500,000. If you do not give him the trust fund, his backup plan is to drain your retirement accounts tomorrow morning and flee the country." I pushed the printouts of the burner phone messages toward my father. "Read the texts, Dad, please." I am begging you to just look at the empirical evidence. My father looked down at the papers. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of genuine doubt cross his eyes. I saw the analytical mind of a former bank manager process the federal watermarks and the undeniable logic of the GPS tracker. But then, the absolute terror of being wrong completely overpowered his reason. The thought of admitting his golden boy was a lie, and his scapegoat daughter was right, was simply too much for his fragile ego to bear. He violently shoved the papers off the table. They scattered across the expensive Persian rug like dead leaves. "You are a monster, Audrey," he yelled, his face turning a dangerous, volatile shade of crimson. "Do you hear me? You are an absolute monster. Your brother comes home with severe combat, PTSD, trying to rebuild his life, and you go through the trouble of fabricating federal documents just to ruin his recovery. You are triggering a war veteran because of your petty financial greed." "Dad, these are real government documents," I cried out, stepping closer to him. "He is going to bankrupt you." Before I could say another word, my mother stood up from her chair. She closed the distance between us in a single fluid step and slapped me violently across the face. The sharp sound echoed loudly in the quiet sunroom. The physical force of the blow snapped my head to the side, leaving my cheek burning with a sudden stinging heat. I stumbled backward, bringing my hand up to my face in pure shock. My mother had never struck me in my entire adult life. "How dare you wish death on your own brother?" she hissed, her voice dripping with pure hatred. "How dare you come into my home and tell me my son is dead just because you are too selfish to support his medical clinic? You have always tried to tear him down. But this is a new low even for you. Get out of my house before I call the police." I stood there looking at the two people who had brought me into this world. They had completely chosen their perfect illusion over their daughter's safety. I slowly lowered my hand from my cheek, feeling the last remaining tie to my family permanently sever. "I am not fabricating anything," I whispered, my voice completely dead. "But I am done trying to save you." I turned around and walked out, leaving them to face the absolute ruin they had invited inside. The heavy front door slammed shut behind me. I walked to my car, my hands shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and profound grief. But the grief was a luxury I could not afford right now. Thorne had a 48-hour deadline with the cartel, and my parents were about to hand him the keys to their entire financial kingdom. I drove back to the city and met Jordan at a secure coffee shop near the Federal Building. We needed to monitor their financial movements closely. If Thorne got his hands on $500,000 in liquid cash, he would disappear before the federal task force could even finalize their raid warrants. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with an urgent email notification. It was a mass message from my father copying me his estate lawyer and my sister Naomi. The subject line read, "Final notice regarding family assets." I opened the email and read the text. My father wrote that since I had maliciously frozen the family trust, he and my mother were taking matters into their own hands to fund their son's medical clinic. They had initiated a rapid second mortgage on the Long Island estate. They were extracting $600,000 in equity, and the funds were scheduled to clear the very next afternoon. He ended the malicious email by stating that when the trust finally unfroze, they would legally seize my portion to pay themselves back for the inconvenience I had caused. $600,000. I stared at the bright screen, my analytical mind immediately searching for the fatal flaw in his timeline. A traditional bank would never process a second mortgage of that magnitude in 24 hours. The standard underwriting process requires extensive property appraisals, deep credit checks, and thorough title reviews that take at least 30 to 45 days. There was only one way to pull massive equity out of a residential property that incredibly fast. They were using a hard money lender. They had bypassed the heavily regulated banking system and gone straight to an aggressive private equity firm. I immediately opened my laptop and connected to my corporate auditing firm's secure virtual private network. I called my assistant Clara and asked her to pull the municipal property records for my parents' Long Island address. Since my father had to file a public lien to legally secure the loan against the house, the lender information would already be registered with the county clerk. Clara expedited the search through the municipal database and emailed me the preliminary filing 10 minutes later. I opened the digital document and read the name of the lending company printed boldly at the top of the deed: Apex Capital Holdings. The name sounded professional and legitimate to an outsider, but in the corporate fraud sector, it was a massive, glaring red flag. I quickly ran the holding company through our internal risk assessment database. Apex Capital was not a standard financial institution. It was a notorious predatory lending syndicate disguised as an elite private equity firm. They specifically targeted wealthy families who were asset-rich, but desperately in need of immediate liquid cash, trapping them in impossible terms. I pulled up the specific loan terms attached to the public filing and my blood ran completely cold. It was absolute financial suicide. They were lending my parents $600,000, but the interest rate was a staggering 35% compounded monthly. Worse, the contract included a highly aggressive acceleration clause buried deep in the fine print. If my parents missed a single payment by even 24 hours, Apex Capital had the absolute legal right to seize the entire estate, valued at over $4 million, and auction it off immediately to recover their initial funds. Thorne had not just manipulated them into giving him money, he had actively orchestrated this specific financial trap. He knew my parents could not get a traditional bank loan in time to satisfy his cartel deadline. He must have fed them the contact information for Apex Capital, playing the role of the knowledgeable businessman, knowing full well the terms would financially destroy them. He was going to take the cash, pay his violent overseas debts, and vanish without a trace, leaving my parents trapped in a predatory contract that would inevitably strip them of their home and their retirement. Jordan read the loan terms over my shoulder and let out a sharp, frustrated breath. "We cannot let that wire transfer go through," he said quietly, tapping the screen. "Once the cash hits Thorne's offshore account, it is gone forever. And with those terms, your parents will default in less than 3 months. They will lose the house to the syndicate." I looked at the lender contract again. An idea began to form in my mind. It was a strategy so aggressive and legally complex that it would permanently sever any remaining ties I had with my family, but it was the only way to trap Thorne and simultaneously block the syndicate from stealing the estate. I was not going to stop the loan. I was going to buy the debt myself. I turned to Jordan and laid out the strategy. Predatory lenders like Apex Capital do not actually want to own residential real estate. They want liquid cash and high-interest yields. If a third party offers to buy the newly issued promissory note from them, immediately paying them a premium on top of the principal, they will almost always assign the debt over to avoid the hassle of a potential foreclosure process. I opened my personal brokerage account on my laptop. This was my hidden fortress. Over the last decade, while my parents flaunted their wealth and funded the Golden Boys' lavish lifestyle, I quietly funneled every corporate bonus and promotion increase into aggressive index funds and blue-chip stocks. I had built my own wealth completely independent of their toxic control. I hovered my cursor over the Sell All button. Liquidating $600,000 in a single afternoon meant taking a massive tax hit and draining the safety net I had spent my entire adult life meticulously building. It was terrifying. But this was not just about money anymore. This was about severing the chains my parents used to control me and trapping a violent criminal. I clicked the button. The screen refreshed, showing a massive cash balance ready to be deployed. I could not approach Apex Capital using my own name, or my parents would be notified of the lien transfer immediately, and panic. I needed an impenetrable corporate shield. I spent the next hour rapidly registering a blind, limited liability company in Wyoming, a state with strict corporate anonymity laws. I named the shell company Vanguard Holdings. Once the entity was legally active, and the federal tax identification number was generated, I called a former colleague in the financial district who specialized in distressed debt acquisitions. For a hefty consulting fee, he agreed to act as my broker and approach Apex Capital on behalf of Vanguard Holdings. The negotiation was fast and ruthless. My broker called the syndicate managers just as they were finalizing the underwriting to wire the funds to my parents. He offered to buy the paper the exact second the ink dried, taking the risk completely off their books, plus a 5% immediate cash premium. It was an offer a hard money lender would never refuse. They secured a guaranteed instant profit with absolutely zero operational risk. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the syndicate accepted the deal. I watched my computer screen closely as the digital escrow closed. My broker forwarded the finalized assignment of the deed of trust to my encrypted email. I printed the document and laid it flat on the dining table, right next to the shattered glass from Thorne's violent break-in. I stared at the bold legal print. It clearly stated that the $600,000 promissory note backed by the $4 million Long Island estate had been fully transferred to Vanguard Holdings. Jordan placed his hand on my shoulder, leaning down to read the contract. He let out a low whistle. "You actually did it," he said, genuine awe in his voice. "You own their debt." I looked up at him, my expression hardening. "I own their house," I corrected him. "The acceleration clause is still fully active. My parents think they just outsmarted me. They think they successfully bypassed the frozen trust and secured the cash to pay their precious trauma surgeon. They have absolutely no idea that the moment they miss their first payment, which they inevitably will once Thorne steals the cash and runs, I have the absolute legal right to foreclose and seize the property immediately." I had successfully flipped the entire power dynamic of my family in a single afternoon. For 33 years, my father had used his wealth and the estate to threaten me, control me, and demand my unwavering obedience. He used it to fund the illusion of a perfect son, while treating me like a disposable, jealous asset. Now I held the literal deed to his kingdom. If he defaulted, he would be completely homeless, and I would be the landlord executing the eviction notice. But the financial trap was only half the battle. Thorne was still expecting his payout tomorrow. He was still a desperate, violent mercenary who owed a ruthless cartel $500,000. My phone buzzed loudly on the desk, shattering the quiet of the dining room. It was an incoming secure message from the FBI task force commander. The text was brief and highly classified. The federal wiretap on my parents' house had just intercepted a crucial phone call. Thorne had instructed my parents to bring the $600,000 in certified bank drafts to a private meeting tomorrow morning to officially launch the medical clinic. The location was a rented luxury penthouse suite in Manhattan. The stage was officially set for the final confrontation. Thorne thought he was walking into a room to collect his massive payday from a pair of gullible, wealthy victims. He had no idea he was walking into a federal snare. And he certainly had not realized that the quiet, dismissed sister had just checkmated his entire financial operation. Jordan read the text message from his task force commander again, his eyes narrowing as he processed the logistical details of the intercepted phone call. "A luxury penthouse suite in Manhattan, Jordan," muttered, memorizing the address printed on the screen. "That gives us our confined space. Now we just need to finalize the tactical parameters with the Bureau." He grabbed his reinforced forensic kit, which still held the blood sample from our broken French door, and the evidence bag containing the hollowed-out Rolex. "I am heading back to the federal building right now," he told me, grabbing his car keys. "I need to get this DNA swab rushed through the federal laboratory to definitively link Thorne to the break-in, and I need to sit down with the commander to map out exactly how we are going to execute this raid tomorrow morning." An hour later, Jordan was standing inside the Secure Tactical Operations Center at the local FBI field office. Commander Davis, a hardened veteran of international organized crime syndicates, stood over a massive digital table displaying the architectural blueprints of the Manhattan high-rise. Jordan laid the physical evidence out on the cold metal table. The Interpol red notice for Elias Thorne, the GPS tracker Isaiah had extracted from the watch, and the preliminary lab confirmation matching the blood from our house to Thorne's international criminal profile. Commander Davis reviewed the file, his expression grim and completely focused. We have enough evidence to arrest him for breaking and entering and maybe corporate espionage based on the listening device, Davis said, tapping the plastic evidence bag with his pen. But those are local and state charges. A smart defense attorney could tie us up in jurisdictional red tape for years, and Thorne might just make bail and vanish before the international warrants are fully processed. We want this guy permanently locked inside a federal penitentiary. To do that, we need to catch him in the active commission of a high-level federal crime. We need him committing wire fraud and extortion simultaneously. Jordan nodded in agreement. The intercepted phone call confirmed he is meeting my in-laws at 9 tomorrow morning to collect $600,000 in certified bank drafts, Jordan explained, pointing to the location on the map. He thinks they are funding his new medical clinic. But the money they are bringing him is from a predatory loan that my wife secretly bought out this afternoon. Davis leaned over the digital blueprints, tracing the layout of the top floor. The location is perfect. A penthouse suite limits his escape routes to a single elevator bank and 2 emergency stairwells. We can easily lock down the entire top floor. But to trigger the federal wire fraud statute and guarantee a life sentence, we need the financial transaction to cross state lines or utilize federal banking networks while he is actively deceiving the victims. And more importantly, we need a full confession on tape. We need him to drop the Trauma Surgeon Act, acknowledge his real identity, and admit his criminal intent while he is trying to take the money. That means my wife has to be in that room, Jordan said, his voice tightening with a protective edge. She is the only one who can push him hard enough to break his character. She knows exactly which financial buttons to press to make him lose his temper and show his true colors to her parents. Commander Davis looked at Jordan seriously. Having a civilian in the room during a tactical sting operation involving a violent mercenary is incredibly high risk, Jordan. If Thorne realizes he is trapped, he might draw a weapon and take hostages. My wife is a senior corporate fraud auditor, Jordan replied with absolute confidence. She handles hostile financial confrontations for a living. And she wants to be the one to look him in the eye when his entire operation crumbles to the ground. Davis finally agreed. He authorized a full tactical deployment for the following morning. 24 undercover federal agents would infiltrate the Manhattan high-rise before dawn, posing as building maintenance workers, valet attendants, and hotel security staff. A specialized breach team would be staged exactly 1 floor below the penthouse, waiting for a specific audio signal to bypass the electronic locks and swarm the room. Jordan returned home late that evening, exhausted but completely focused. He sat down at the dining room table with me and Isaiah, who had just returned from securing his watch repair shop. Jordan walked us through the entire FBI operational playbook step by step. He reached into his pocket and handed me a tiny, discreet audio transmitter disguised as a standard lapel pin, instructing me to wear it on my blazer tomorrow. This feeds directly into the tactical headsets of the federal breach team, Jordan explained, showing me how to activate the hidden microphone. When you have him backed into a corner when he tries to take the money and drops the disguise, you give us the signal. I took the small device, feeling its cold metal against my palm. I was not afraid. The terror I had felt during the hallway confrontation was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. Thorne had underestimated me from the very beginning. He thought I was just an obstacle in his way to an easy payday. Tomorrow I was going to show him exactly what happens when you try to con an auditor. The first step of the trap required me to completely swallow my pride. I had to convince a violent mercenary and 2 incredibly stubborn parents that they had completely broken me. I sat at my kitchen table, taking several deep breaths to prepare myself for the performance of a lifetime. Jordan stood across from me, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, giving me a silent nod of encouragement. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. It rang 4 times before she finally answered. Yes, she said, her voice dripping with absolute frost. I forced a tremor into my voice. Mom, I said, letting out a calculated, ragged sigh. I am so sorry. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background at their estate. What exactly are you sorry for, Audrey? She demanded, refusing to give me even an inch of grace. For everything I lied, squeezing my eyes shut to force a single genuine tear down my cheek, which helped thicken my voice. I was just so scared and jealous. I let my professional paranoia completely ruin my judgment. I have been sitting here all night realizing that I am about to lose my entire family over money. I do not want to be cut out of your lives. I do not want to be the villain anymore. Please, Mom, I want to make it right. I heard my father mutter something in the background, followed by the rustling of the phone changing hands. Well, it is about time you came to your senses, my father barked into the receiver. Your mother has been crying all afternoon because of your little stunt. You have put this family through absolute hell, Audrey. I know, Dad, I sobbed, making sure the audio clipped just enough to sound authentic. I called my bank an hour ago. I initiated the paperwork to completely unfreeze the trust fund. I want to give Nolan the $500,000. I want to fully fund his medical clinic. The hostility on the other end of the line instantly dissolved into greedy satisfaction. That is the smartest decision you have made in years, my father said, his tone shifting to patronizing approval. Your brother is a forgiving man. Once the money clears, we can sit down as a family and put this ugly chapter behind us. We will cancel the secondary loan we were forced to take out today. That is exactly what I was hoping for, I replied, wiping my face and steadying my voice just a fraction. But because of the federal freeze I initiated, my corporate legal team insists on a formal sign-off to release the liability. I cannot just wire it. We have to sign the release documents in person with a notary present. Fine, my father agreed impatiently. Where and when? I gave him the exact address of the Manhattan high-rise the FBI had secured. My lead attorney has a private penthouse suite downtown, I explained smoothly. It is highly secure and discreet. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Bring Nolan. Once we all sign, the bank will release the $500,000 directly into his business account on the spot. We will be there, my father said. Do not be late, Audrey. He hung up without saying goodbye. I lowered the phone and looked at Jordan. He let out a low whistle. You are a terrifyingly good actress, he said, walking over and kissing the top of my head. They bought it completely. They bought the money. I corrected him. They do not care about my apology. They just want the cash. 10 minutes later, my phone screen lit up with a new text message. It was from an unknown number, but I knew exactly who was holding the phone on the other end. I opened the message. It read, Glad you finally remembered your place in this family, little sister. See you tomorrow. Bring a pen. I stared at the glowing screen. Elias Thorne was taking the bait hook, line, and sinker. His massive ego and his desperate need to pay off the cartel had completely blinded him to the reality of the situation. He thought he had successfully intimidated a corporate auditor into handing over $500,000. He thought his threatening hallway confrontation and his violent break-in had broken my spirit. I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. The trap was completely set. The FBI breach team was already mobilizing in the city. The digital audio transmitter was sitting on my counter, ready to be pinned to my lapel. My parents were blindly walking into a federal snare, fully believing they were about to secure their golden boy's future. And Thorne was walking into a concrete box from which he would never escape. I went upstairs to my bedroom and opened my closet. I bypassed the casual clothes and reached for my sharpest, most intimidating corporate suit. If I was going to dismantle a criminal operation and permanently end my relationship with my toxic parents in a single morning, I was going to dress like the executioner they forced me to become. The morning sun glared off the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse. The suite was massive, decorated in minimalist black leather and chrome, perfectly selling the illusion of a high-powered law firm. Jordan stood near the massive mahogany conference table, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that expertly concealed his shoulder holster. Isaiah stood by the floor-to-ceiling bookshelf near the main entrance, looking completely relaxed but hyper-vigilant. I sat at the head of the table, my posture rigid, waiting for the trap to spring. Pinned discreetly to the lapel of my blazer was the FBI audio transmitter, feeding every single word of this interaction directly to the tactical breach team waiting one floor below us. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy double doors opened. My mother entered first, clutching a designer handbag, followed by my father carrying a leather briefcase. Elias Thorne walked in right behind them. He looked incredibly smug, wearing a light gray suit and an arrogant smirk that made my blood boil. He thought he had already won. He thought this was simply a victory lap before he collected his money and disappeared into the wind to pay off his cartel debts. "Good morning, Audrey," my father said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. "Let us make this quick. We have a very busy day ahead of us, and your brother has a clinic to secure." My mother did not even look at me. She simply pulled out a chair for Thorne and sat down next to him, patting his arm affectionately. Thorne leaned back in the plush leather seat and steepled his fingers, staring at me with complete predatory confidence. He nodded toward the thick stack of legal documents resting on the center of the table. "Where do I sign?" little sister Thorne asked smoothly. I picked up my silver fountain pen. I rolled it slowly between my fingers, letting the silence stretch out and fill the massive room. I looked directly into his eyes, refusing to break contact. Before we finalized the transfer of $500,000, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large space. "I have one final question about the operational portfolio you submitted. As a corporate auditor, it is my fiduciary duty to fully understand the medical services this money will be funding." My father groaned loudly and rolled his eyes, slapping his hand against his briefcase. "Audrey, stop playing these bureaucratic games. You promised you would sign the papers today. Do not start this nonsense again. You are just trying to humiliate him." "It is perfectly fine," Dad Thorne interrupted, holding up a hand to silence him. He looked at me, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "If my sister needs a little more reassurance to feel important, I am happy to indulge her." "What do you want to know, Audrey?" I opened his glossy business plan to the 4th page and laid it flat on the table. "In your executive summary, you highlighted a specific case study to demonstrate your surgical expertise. You wrote about saving a 10-year-old boy who suffered severe crush injuries in a building collapse. You claim you performed an emergency orthopedic reconstruction under extreme duress." "That is correct," Thorne said, not missing a beat. "It was a highly complex procedure. The environment was unstable and we had limited resources." "Fascinating," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "Walk me through the exact surgical procedure." "The boy had a comminuted fracture of the right femur with active arterial hemorrhaging. As the lead orthopedic surgeon, what was your immediate protocol?" Thorne let out a soft chuckle, trying to appear completely unfazed by the clinical interrogation. "Well, obviously, the first priority is stabilizing the patient. We had to administer a massive dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics to prevent immediate sepsis. Then I made a lateral incision bypass the fractured bone and clamped the pulmonary artery to stop the bleeding. After that, we just applied a standard tourniquet to the chest and waited for the medevac." The room went dead silent. Even my parents, who had absolutely no medical training, looked slightly confused by his answer. They glanced at each other, their unwavering confidence fracturing for just a second. "You clamped the pulmonary artery," I repeated slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of his statement hang in the air. "The pulmonary artery is located inside the human heart, Nolan. You opened a child's chest to stop bleeding in his leg, and you applied a tourniquet to his torso." Thorne's arrogant smile vanished instantly. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his face as he realized he had just used medical terminology he did not actually understand. He tried to quickly recover his composure. "You are twisting my words," he snapped defensively, his voice rising in pitch. "It was a chaotic war zone. We had to improvise cardiovascular bypass techniques. You are just an accountant. You have no idea what it takes to save a life in the field." "I am not an accountant," I said, dropping the pen onto the table with a sharp clatter. "And you are not a doctor." While Thorne was frantically trying to defend his ridiculous medical explanation, he completely failed to notice the movement in the room. Jordan had silently stepped away from the conference table and positioned his large frame directly in front of the emergency exit. Isaiah had smoothly slid a heavy oak chair directly in front of the main double doors, completely blocking the only other way out of the penthouse suite. The physical trap was now firmly closed. Thorne finally registered the shift in the room. He looked at the heavy doors, then at Jordan, and finally back at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was not here to collect a check. He was completely cornered in a room with a forensic investigator and a woman who knew exactly who he was. The sophisticated facade of the golden boy evaporated completely, replaced by the cornered, violent energy of a mercenary. The veins in his neck bulged as his face contorted into a mask of absolute rage. "You think you are so smart?" he hissed, his voice dropping into a dangerous, guttural growl. He stood up abruptly, kicking his heavy leather chair backward with enough force to dent the drywall. His right hand reached quickly inside his tailored suit jacket, his fingers wrapping around the heavy steel of a concealed weapon. Jordan did not flinch. He did not yell, and he did not draw his own weapon. Instead, his hand slid smoothly under the heavy lip of the mahogany conference table. He pressed a small concealed button taped to the underside of the wood. A heavy synchronized metallic thud echoed through the penthouse. The heavy double doors and the emergency exit sealed shut simultaneously. The electronic magnetic locks engaged with a sound of absolute finality, a deep vibration that you could feel right through the floorboards. The luxury penthouse was no longer a meeting room. It was a holding cell. My mother let out a sharp, terrified gasp, clutching my father's arm so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "What is happening?" she cried out, looking frantically from the locked doors to Jordan's stoic face. "Open the door right now." My father stood up, his face flushed with anger, completely misunderstanding the situation. "Audrey, unlock that door immediately. You are taking this sibling rivalry way too far. I will not have you trapping us in here like animals just to prove a point." Thorne froze. His hand was still buried inside his jacket, gripping the firearm, but the mechanical sound of the locks had completely shattered his momentum. He looked at the heavy oak chair Isaiah had wedged under the door handle, then back to the steel frame of the emergency exit Jordan was blocking. He was a trained tactician. He instantly calculated the angles, looked at the reinforced glass of the windows, and realized he was standing inside a fortified box with no secondary escape route. I did not break eye contact with him. I slowly reached out and placed my hand flat on top of the glossy manila folder containing the trust fund transfer documents. The $500,000 he was so desperate to steal was sitting right under my palm. With a single deliberate motion, I pushed the entire folder off the edge of the table. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy slap, scattering the unsigned release papers across the room. "You are not getting a single dime from this family, Elias," I said, saying his real name out loud for the first time. The sound of his true name hit him like a physical shock. His jaw tightened, and the predatory, arrogant confidence completely drained from his eyes. I opened my leather tote bag and pulled out a second, much thinner file folder. I opened it and slid a crisp, high-resolution printout across the polished mahogany table. The paper glided over the smooth wood and stopped exactly in front of him. It was the Interpol red notice. His own face stared back at him, printed directly above his actual name, Elias Thorne. Beneath his photograph was a lengthy, detailed list of international warrants for wire fraud, identity theft, and arms smuggling. Next, I reached into my bag and pulled out the clear plastic evidence bag containing the hollowed-out Rolex casing. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a sharp clatter right next to his Interpol file. "You really should not have tried to spy on a master watchmaker," I told him, my voice completely cold. Isaiah realized the movement was fake the second he looked at it. "He disconnected your little tracker yesterday morning, long before you broke into my house. We have been mapping your digital footprint, tracking your burner phone, and reading your cartel messages ever since." My father leaned over the table, squinting at the Interpol document. His face turned a sickly shade of gray as he read the international criminal charges. "Audrey, what is this?" he stammered, his voice trembling as the perfect illusion of his golden boy began to fracture. "What is going on here?" I ignored my father for the moment, keeping my absolute focus on Thorne. Finally, I placed the sealed federal laboratory report on the table. "You made a fatal mistake when you broke into my house to destroy my auditing files," I explained, making sure my voice was loud and clear so the hidden FBI microphone on my lapel captured every single syllable. "You broke the glass on my back door with a crowbar, and you left a drop of your blood behind on the jagged edge. My husband is a senior forensic scene investigator. He collected your blood. The federal crime lab confirmed the biological match 3 hours ago. We have you dead to rights on breaking and entering corporate espionage and attempted federal wire fraud. Thorne looked down at the mountain of undeniable evidence. The walls were closing in on him rapidly. He knew the cartel deadline was expiring today, and his backup plan had just evaporated into thin air. Slowly, he pulled his hand out of his jacket, revealing the dark metal grip of a compact semi-automatic pistol. He did not point it directly at me, but he held it tightly against his side, his knuckles turning stark white. You thought you could just walk in here, pretend to be a dead trauma surgeon, and walk out with my parents' money? I continued delivering the final blow. You thought I was just a jealous sister you could easily bully. But you are nothing but a desperate mercenary. And your operation is officially over. My father lunged forward, trying to grab my arm across the mahogany table, completely ignoring the dangerous shift in Thorne's demeanor. Audrey. Have you lost your mind? He screamed, his face inches from mine. You are setting up your own brother. You fabricated all of this because you are a greedy, spiteful child. You printed fake police reports just to avoid paying him what he deserves. I did not flinch. I pulled my arm out of his reach and looked dead at my parents. My voice was steady, projecting clearly, so the hidden FBI microphone on my lapel could transmit every single word to the breach team below us. This man is not your son, I stated with absolute unwavering clarity. Your real son died 2 years ago in a hospital bombing in Aleppo. This is Elias Thorne. He is the mercenary who looted that hospital. He stole Nolan's wallet, his passport, and his private journals right off his corpse. He read those journals to learn exactly how to manipulate you. My mother covered her ears with her hands, letting out a piercing wail of pure denial. Stop it, she shrieked, rocking back and forth in her heavy leather chair. You are a liar. He is my baby. He came home to us. He is sitting right here. Thorne realized the charade was no longer serving him. The mask of the traumatized noble veteran melted away, completely revealing the cold, calculating killer underneath. Shut up, Thorne snapped, his voice harsh and violently commanding. He raised the semi-automatic pistol, pointing it directly at my father's chest. My father's angry tirade cut off instantly. He stumbled backward, tripping over the legs of his chair, his hands flying up in the air as the reality of the cold steel finally registered in his brain. The man he had defended, the man he had mortgaged his entire estate for, the man he had chosen over his own daughter, was now holding him at gunpoint. Get back against the wall, Thorne ordered, gesturing aggressively with the barrel of the gun toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. All of you, move right now. My mother began to hyperventilate, clinging frantically to my father as they backed away from the conference table. Jordan and Isaiah remained perfectly still, their eyes locked on Thorne, calculating the exact distance between them and the weapon. They were waiting for the perfect opening, trusting the federal tactical plan. Thorne grabbed the glossy manila folder containing the trust transfer documents and shoved it roughly into his jacket pocket. Then he picked up the printed Interpol red notice, crumpled it into a tight ball, and threw it on the floor. You think you won, Auditor? He sneered, keeping the gun leveled at our group. You think locking a couple of electronic doors is going to stop me? I have fought my way out of active military zones. A civilian building will not even slow me down. I kept my hands flat on the table, maintaining direct eye contact with the man who had stolen my brother's face. You are not in a war zone, Elias. You are in a concrete cage, and you are completely out of time. Thorne let out a dark, humorless laugh. He reached into his pocket with his free hand and pulled out his black burner phone. He kept his eyes darting between Jordan and Isaiah, recognizing them as the primary physical threats in the room. I am walking out of here with the equity from their estate, Thorne stated, nodding toward my terrified parents. The hard money loan funds are supposed to clear in 10 minutes. I am going to make them log into their banking portal and transfer every single penny into my offshore account right now. If anyone tries to stop me, the old man dies first. My father let out a pathetic, suffocated whimper. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, silent plea for help. The arrogant patriarch, who had threatened to disown me and destroy my career just 24 hours ago, was now completely paralyzed by fear. I shook my head slowly, feeling a deep sense of finality. You cannot touch that money, Elias, I told him, keeping my voice perfectly calm to ensure the wiretap caught the confession. Because they do not have it. The hard money loan they took out yesterday from Apex Capital does not belong to them anymore. Thorne frowned, his grip on the gun tightening dangerously. What are you talking about? He demanded, stepping closer to the table. I bought their debt. I revealed, letting the truth hit both him and my parents simultaneously. I used a blind shell company to purchase the promissory note from the lending syndicate yesterday afternoon. The $600,000 you are waiting for was rerouted into an escrow account that I completely control. You are never going to see a single dime of it. You are broke, Elias, and the cartel is coming for you. My father gasped, completely forgetting the gun for a split second. You bought the loan? He whispered, his face turning an ashen gray. You own our house. Yes, I do, I replied without looking at him. And since the money never reached you, you are already in default. The revelation hit Thorne like a physical blow. His eyes widened as his entire exit strategy evaporated in front of him. He looked at my parents, then at me, realizing he had been completely outmaneuvered by the person he thought was the weakest link in the room. His finger tightened aggressively on the trigger. He raised the gun, shifting his aim directly from my father to my chest. You ruined everything, he roared, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. You ruined everything, he roared, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. Thorne shifted his weight, his knuckles whitening against the trigger as he leveled the barrel of the semi-automatic pistol directly at my chest. I did not close my eyes. I did not scream. I knew what was coming next. Before Thorne could fully extend his arm to steady his aim, Jordan moved. He did not hesitate, and he did not issue a verbal warning. Utilizing his extensive close-quarters combat training from the State Police Academy, Jordan closed the 6-foot gap between them in a fraction of a second. He lunged forward, staying incredibly low to avoid the line of fire, and drove his left forearm violently into Thorne's gun hand. The sharp impact forced the barrel of the pistol upward toward the ceiling, just as Thorne pulled the trigger. A single deafening gunshot rang out, shattering the heavy glass of the chandelier above the mahogany table. Shards of crystal rained down on the polished wood like jagged hail. Thorne was a trained mercenary, but he was completely fueled by panic and adrenaline. Jordan was fueled by cold, calculated precision. As the gun fired harmlessly into the air, Jordan pivoted his hips, grabbing Thorne's extended right wrist with both hands. He twisted the joint aggressively outward while sweeping Thorne's leading leg from underneath him. The mechanical physics of the takedown were flawless. Thorne lost his balance entirely, letting out a sharp grunt of pain as his wrist was violently hyperextended. They hit the hardwood floor with a bone-rattling thud. The heavy semi-automatic pistol slipped from Thorne's fingers, sliding across the slick floorboards until it hit the metal base of a leather chair. Isaiah moved instantly. He did not freeze in the chaos. He dove forward, scooped up the discarded weapon, and rapidly ejected the magazine. He cleared the chamber with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood the mechanics of precision machinery. Isaiah shoved the unloaded weapon into his own waistband and positioned himself directly in front of my terrified parents, acting as a solid human shield in case Thorne managed to break free. But Thorne was not breaking free. Jordan shifted his entire body weight, driving his knee directly into the center of Thorne's spine, pinning the mercenary flat against the floor. He grabbed both of Thorne's arms, wrenching them forcefully behind his back and locking them in an agonizing joint hold. Thorne thrashed wildly, kicking his heavy boots against the floor and letting out a string of vicious, breathless curses. He fought with the ferocity of a trapped animal, but Jordan's grip was absolute iron. "Stay down," Jordan barked, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. "Do not move a single muscle or I will snap your arm." At that exact moment, the audio transmitter on my lapel did its job. Commander Davis and his tactical team had heard the gunshot. The heavy wooden double doors that Isaiah had barricaded with the oak chair did not just open. They were violently breached. A heavy steel battering ram smashed through the center of the wood, splintering the frame and sending the barricade chair skidding across the room. Federal agents flooded into the penthouse suite in a coordinated wave of dark tactical gear, heavy ballistic vests, and raised assault rifles. The room was instantly filled with the blinding strobe of tactical flashlights and a chorus of deafening commands. FBI, drop your weapons, get your hands where we can see them. The overwhelming display of federal power completely paralyzed everyone in the room except Jordan. He maintained his punishing hold on Thorne until two heavily armed agents rushed over, dropping to their knees to take over the restraint. Jordan released his grip and stepped back, raising his hands slowly to signal he was a friendly asset to the incoming breach team. The federal agents forced Thorne's face into the hardwood floor. They pulled his arms back roughly, and the sharp metallic click of heavy-duty handcuffs echoed through the room. Thorne was entirely subdued, his wrists locked tight with industrial steel. The fight was completely beaten out of him, replaced by the crushing reality of his failed operation. "Get him on his feet," Commander Davis ordered, stepping into the room with his badge highly visible on his tactical vest. Two agents hauled Thorne up from the floor. His light gray suit was torn and stained with sweat. The smug, arrogant face of the international trauma surgeon was completely gone. He looked exactly like what he was, a defeated, desperate criminal. As they dragged him toward the shattered doorway, Thorne began to scream. He thrashed against the agent, screaming violent threats at me, cursing his cartel debts and howling like a madman. His screams echoed down the long hallway, growing fainter as they forced him into the elevator to face his federal life sentence. I stood at the head of the conference table, brushing a piece of shattered crystal off my sleeve. The threat was completely neutralized. As the heavy footsteps of the federal agents faded down the corridor, an eerie, suffocating silence fell over the shattered penthouse. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder from the discharged weapon, and the carpet was covered in glittering shards of broken crystal. Jordan kept his hand resting lightly on his holster, his eyes scanning the room to ensure the area was entirely secure. Isaiah stepped away from my parents, taking a deep breath and smoothing out his canvas jacket. My mother slowly slid down the smooth wooden wall, her legs finally giving out completely. She hit the floor with a soft thud and buried her face in her trembling hands. A guttural, agonizing wail tore from her throat. It was not the dramatic, attention-seeking crying she had used at the country club gala. It was the raw, broken sound of a mother who had just realized her son was truly dead, and that she had spent the last 2 years worshipping the monster who had stolen his life. My father dropped to his knees right next to her. He stared blankly at the crumpled Interpol red notice lying on the floor, the printed face of Elias Thorne mocking him. The perfect aristocratic patriarch was completely shattered. He reached out with shaking hands and pulled my mother into his chest, both of them sobbing uncontrollably amid the ruins of their own arrogance. They wept for the son they had lost in a Syrian hospital, and they wept for the absolute humiliation they had brought upon themselves. Slowly, my father looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale and lined with sudden, profound aging. "Audrey," he choked out, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. "Oh my God, Audrey, what have we done? We did not know. You have to believe us, we had absolutely no idea." My mother looked up, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She reached a shaking hand out toward me across the floor. "Please, Audrey," she sobbed, pleading with me like a desperate child. "Please forgive us. We were just so blinded by grief. We wanted him to be alive so badly that we ignored everything. We are so sorry. Please, honey, you are our only child left." I looked down at the two people who had made my entire life a relentless competition I was never allowed to win. I saw their tears, I heard their apologies, but my heart felt absolutely nothing. The well of empathy I had always kept reserved for them was completely dry. I walked slowly around the mahogany table, my shoes crunching softly on the broken glass, until I stood directly over them. "Do not call me honey," I said, my voice as cold and unyielding as the steel cuffs they had just put on Thorne. "And do not dare blame this on your grief. Grief makes people blind, Mom, but it does not make them cruel. You chose to be cruel." My father flinched as if I had struck him. "We were scared, Audrey," he pleaded. "No," I fired back, my voice rising to fill the empty room. "You were arrogant. When Isaiah, a man who has shown you nothing but respect, pointed out the truth about that fake watch, you humiliated him. You made classist jokes about his career to protect a lie. When I asked for a basic financial plan, you threatened to disown me in front of hundreds of people. You kicked me off the board of directors. You drained every single joint bank account I had from my childhood. You tried to financially starve your own daughter, just to appease a stranger who told you exactly what your fragile egos wanted to hear. My mother sobbed louder, pulling her arms around herself. I am so sorry I hit you, she wept, referencing the slap in the sunroom. I was just so angry. You hit me because I brought you the truth, I told her, staring down at her without an ounce of pity. I came to your house with federal documents to save you from a cartel. I tried to save your lives, and you slapped me across the face and called me a monster. You told me I was jealous of a ghost. You were willing to sacrifice your living, loving daughter to protect the illusion of a perfect son. You even sat back and watched while that criminal threatened my corporate career and tried to extort me over my private auditing files. I took a step back, creating a physical boundary to match the emotional one I was permanently setting. You do not get to ask for my forgiveness just because you finally realized you backed the wrong horse. I continued my words, striking them like physical blows. You chose your side. You mortgaged your entire future to fund the man who looted your real son's corpse. You are not sorry for how you treated me. You are just terrified because you have absolutely nothing left. Jordan walked up behind me and placed a steadying hand on the small of my back. Isaiah stood quietly near the door, his presence a silent reminder of the real family I had built. We are your parents, my father whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the cold reality in my eyes. You cannot just walk away from us. We have no one else. Watch me, I replied smoothly. Watch me, I replied smoothly. My father slowly pulled himself up from the hardwood floor, leaning heavily against the edge of the mahogany conference table for support. He looked like a hollow shell of the man who had walked into the penthouse just an hour ago. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. He reached down and gently helped my mother to her feet. She was completely inconsolable, leaning her entire weight against his side, her face buried in his shoulder to hide from the reality of the room. We are leaving, my father announced. His voice was entirely devoid of its usual booming aristocratic authority. It was a weak, trembling whisper. He refused to meet my eyes, looking instead at the shattered glass covering the floor. We are going back to the estate. We need to mourn our son in peace. We will contact our attorneys tomorrow to sort out this horrible mess, but right now we are going home. He turned toward the splintered doorway, attempting to guide my mother through the wreckage left behind by the federal breach team. You are not going home, I said, my voice echoing clearly and sharply across the ruined penthouse. My father stopped dead in his tracks. He slowly turned his head back toward me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. What are you talking about, Audrey? I walked back to my leather tote bag sitting on the far end of the table. I reached inside and pulled out the crisp, legally binding assignment of the deed of trust that I had printed yesterday afternoon. I walked down the length of the table, my heels clicking deliberately against the wood floor, and slid the document across the smooth mahogany. It stopped right at the edge, hovering perfectly in his line of sight. I told you a few minutes ago that you are already in default on the hard money loan. I reminded him, tapping my index finger against the heavy black ink of the legal seal. You borrowed $600,000 from a predatory syndicate yesterday. You signed a contract with an aggressive acceleration clause that required immediate repayment upon any breach of terms, or if the funds failed to reach their intended corporate destination. The funds never reached Thorne. They went straight into my secure escrow. You breached the contract before the money even left the holding account. My father stared blankly at the document. He read the name of the new lien holder, Vanguard Holdings, and the horrifying reality of my previous statement finally pierced through his thick layer of shock. You are Vanguard Holdings, he whispered, the very last drop of color draining from his face. Yes, I am, I confirmed flatly. You do not own that house anymore, Dad. You mortgaged the absolute only real asset you had left to pay off a violent criminal. I bought the debt. And because you are officially in default, I am executing the acceleration clause today. I am foreclosing on the property. You have exactly 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate my property. My mother let out a sharp, breathless gasp and stumbled backward, collapsing heavily into one of the leather chairs. You cannot do this, she cried, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. That is our home. We raised you in that house. Where are we supposed to go? We do not have any liquid cash left. How will we explain this to our friends at the club? You should have thought about your country club status before you tried to bankrupt yourselves to fund a mercenary, I told her, feeling absolutely zero remorse for the tears streaming down her face. You chose to drain our joint accounts. You chose to kick me off the board of directors. You chose to gamble your entire life savings on a blatant lie simply because it made you feel superior to me. Now you get to live with the exact consequences of those choices. My father looked at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. You planned this. He breathed out, his voice shaking with a mix of awe and utter terror. You planned every single step of this to ruin us. I audited you. I corrected him, picking up my tote bag and slipping the heavy strap over my shoulder. I found the fraud in this family, and I meticulously liquidated the toxic assets. You spent my entire life treating me like an emotional punching bag, assuming I would always just take the abuse because I desperately wanted your love. But you pushed me too far. You brought a violent criminal into my life and you forced me to protect myself and my real family. I turned away from them and walked toward Jordan and Isaiah. They were waiting for me near the shattered doorway, standing tall and fiercely protective. Audrey, please, my father begged, taking a desperate, pathetic step toward me. His hands were shaking violently in the air. We have absolutely nothing left. Please do not do this to us. I stopped at the doorway and looked back at them one final time. It was the ultimate payoff. They were completely broken. The golden child they had worshipped was a dead hero they never truly appreciated, replaced by a criminal who had nearly destroyed them. The money they had hoarded and used as a weapon to control me was entirely gone, and the daughter they had relentlessly abused was walking out the door holding the deed to their kingdom. You have each other, I said coldly. That is what you always wanted. I walked out of the penthouse suite, stepping effortlessly over the splintered wood of the barricade. Jordan placed his hand firmly on my lower back, guiding me toward the elevator. Isaiah walked beside us, his posture relaxed and victorious. We rode the elevator down to the main lobby in complete silence, the heavy steel doors shutting out the pathetic sound of my parents weeping in the ruined suite above. The financial hammer had fallen and absolute justice had been served. The financial hammer had fallen and absolute justice had been served. 6 months have passed since that morning in the Manhattan penthouse. A lot can change in half a year when you finally stop carrying the crushing weight of other people's expectations. Tonight, the air is unseasonably warm for an October evening on Long Island. I'm standing in the completely remodeled kitchen of the estate. The heavy, oppressive mahogany furniture and the sterile museum-like decor that my parents prize so highly have all been completely cleared out. In their place is warmth, light, and actual life. I look out through the brand new French doors, the ones that replace the glass Elias Thorne shattered, and watch my real family. Jordan is out on the patio laughing loudly as he attempts to flip steaks on the grill. Isaiah is standing next to him, holding a craft beer, explaining the intricate mechanics of a vintage chronograph he just acquired for his shop. Naomi is setting the large rustic dining table under the string lights, smiling brighter than I have ever seen her smile in our entire lives. When my parents' 30-day eviction notice expired, they quietly packed their remaining belongings and moved into a small rented condominium in New Jersey. The transition was a massive blow to their social status. There were no more country club galas, no more bragging to their wealthy friends about a phantom trauma surgeon, and absolutely no more controlling their daughters through financial manipulation. They have tried calling a few times, leaving tearful voicemails begging for reconciliation, but my number remains permanently blocked. I do not wish them harm, but I completely refuse to allow their toxicity back into my peace. As for Elias Thorne, his trial was brief. Faced with the overwhelming mountain of forensic evidence, Jordan collected the audio recording from my wiretap and the crushing weight of the federal charges. He accepted a plea deal. He is currently serving a 25-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The cartel he owed money to was dismantled shortly after his arrest thanks to the data extracted from his burner phone. I grab a bottle of wine and walk out onto the patio to join the people I love. As I pour glasses for everyone and we sit down around the table, I look at the faces illuminated by the warm glow of the overhead lights. This right here is family. Growing up, I was constantly force-fed the narrative that family is strictly defined by blood. I was taught that shared DNA is an unbreakable contract that demands absolute loyalty, no matter how much abuse, manipulation, or blatant disrespect you have to endure. My parents used the word family as a weapon to keep me in line, a guilt trip to force me into sacrificing my own hard-earned stability to fund a lie. But the truth is, blood does not make a family. Blood is simply a biological coincidence. Family is defined by the people who choose to stand by you when the absolute worst happens. Family is Isaiah stepping in front of my parents to shield them from a bullet, even after they spent years degrading him. Family is Jordan carefully sweeping for DNA on his hands and knees to protect our home. Family is Naomi standing firmly by my side when our parents demanded we turn against each other. Family is a verb. It is the consistent daily action of showing respect, offering support, and protecting one another. It is never an excuse for abuse, and it is certainly never a free pass to exploit someone you claim to love. If you are watching this and you are currently suffocating under the weight of a toxic family dynamic, I need you to hear this clearly. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep your relatives warm. You are allowed to walk away from people who only value you for what they can extract from you. Setting a firm boundary does not make you a bad person. It makes you a survivor. You have the absolute right to build a life filled with people who celebrate you, respect you, and protect you. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make the terrifying decision to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace and future? How did you find the strength to walk away? And what does your chosen family look like today? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to read right now to find their own courage. Thank you so much for following my story. If this message resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, financial independence, and reclaiming your life. Never let anyone dictate your worth. You are stronger, smarter, and infinitely more valuable than they want you to believe. Keep fighting for your peace, and I will see you in the next video. The most profound takeaway from Audrey's harrowing journey is the powerful realization that shared DNA does not entitle anyone to your peace, your resources, or your subjugation. Society conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, often weaponizing the concept of family to demand unconditional loyalty even in the face of blatant abuse. Audrey's story shatters this dangerous illusion. For her entire life, her parents used her desire for their love as leverage, treating her as a disposable asset while worshiping a fabricated golden child. When the truth about the mercenary was laid bare, her parents did not apologize for their cruelty. They doubled down on their delusion, physically and emotionally attacking the only daughter who tried to save them. The lesson here is absolute and unapologetic. You cannot rescue people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding you, and you are never obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic relatives warm. Audrey's true victory was not merely catching a criminal or legally seizing her parents' estate. It was the radical act of walking away from a game she was never meant to win. She redefined family as a verb, an action demonstrated through the mutual respect, fierce protection, and unwavering support shown by Jordan, Isaiah, and Naomi. She proved that true empowerment comes from severing the chains of biological obligation and building a life anchored in genuine respect. Walking away from toxic parents is rarely an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You are the architect of your own life, and you have the absolute right to evict anyone who brings destruction into your home. If you are suffocating under the weight of toxic family expectations, take that terrifying but necessary first step to set your boundaries today and reclaim the narrative of your own worth.